Good morning, everyone. Mrs. Hudson here again with chapter 13. So the story is most definitely moving on. We will see what happens in today's chapter. Robert woke to find someone shaking him. He sat up and groggily scratched his head. Lily stood by his bedside, twisting his cap in her hands. She was wearing the old clothes he'd given her, and her face was flushed with worry. "What time is it?" he asked, yawning. 1 o'clock. Lily rubbed a hand across her face. "You've got to come. Those men are outside the shop." "You're certain?" "Yes. Roach is standing at the end of the street and Mould's out there too, hidden in the dark. I'm sure of it." "I'd better have a look." He jumped out of bed and twitched a gap in the curtains. Melting snowflakes spattered the window pane. Mr. Roach stood bold as brass under the single naphtha street lamp, his mirrored eyes glinting like quicksilver. He raised his skull stick and beckoned, and the two men appeared from the shadows, Mould and someone else, a rough-looking type. Robert stepped back from the window as they glanced up at the shop. "Did they spot you?" Lily asked. "I don't think so. There's someone else with them as well, another big bloke. Looks like one from the hunt when they were after Malkin." Lily fidgeted with the lining of the cap. "I knew they'd find me." Robert reached for the candle stub and she leapt at him. "Don't like that, they'll see." Her voice was tinged with hysteria. "It might scare them off," Robert said. "Besides, they won't get in, not with Dar's locks. They're unbreakable. We're safe as mice in a mill here." His eyes darted about the room. "I doubt that. Anyway, I can't stay. Not with them watching the house. You'll have to help me get away." "How?" "I don't know," she frowned. "Could we ask your Dar?" "I'll go wake him." Robert pulled his trousers on over the top of his nightshirt and threw on his shoes and a warm jacket. Lily hurried to the doorway. "I'll wind Malkin." 2 minutes later, they all met at the foot of the stairs. Lily had her bundle wedged under an arm, while Malkin stood at her feet, his ears alert, listening for the slightest noise. Tadeus took charge. "Robert's told me what's going on," he said. Lily smiled at him, but she seemed on edge. "I'm afraid, sir, I haven't thanked you or Robert properly for everything you've done for Malkin and me." "It was nothing, Miss Hartman," Tadeus said. "But listen, we don't think you should go, not yet. It's not safe." Malkin agreed. "You should listen to them, Lily." "No," Lily shook her head. "We've put you in enough danger already." Robert interrupted. "We want you to stay, Lily. I want you to. You can hide till tomorrow. Dar knows a place. We're going." "As you wish," Tadeus told her. "But in that case, we're coming too. You need protection." He turned to his son. "The back door's probably our best bet, Robert. Check the yard." Robert crept to the end of the corridor and peered through the frosted panes at the white footprintless surface. "Looks clear," he said. Tadeus searched through the keys on his chain. "Do you need a warmer jacket, Miss Hartman?" he asked. "There isn't time," she said. "Here, have this." He reached up and took a long woolen coat from a peg on the wall, which he helped her put on, his nimble fingers buttoning up the mismatched buttons. "It's a little big, I'm afraid, but it'll keep you warm on your journey." "Thank you," she said. Tadeus beckoned his son. "Robert, come. We'll get some money from the till." The four of them peered through the rag curtain into the shop. The street outside was dark and empty, and yet something wasn't right. It took Robert a moment to realise what. Then his Dar spoke his thoughts aloud. "How queer! The clocks have stopped." "You must have forgotten to wind them," Malkin said. "It's a bad omen," Robert whispered. "When the clocks go silent, death is near." "Oh, tush!" Tadeus stepped through the curtain. Unlocking the till, he counted out a handful of coins from the drawer into his hand. Suddenly, behind his head, two figures wrapped in long coats sidled into the frame of the window outside. It was Roach and Mould. Their eyes flashed in the moonlight. "Ah!" Robert hissed. Tadeus looked up just as Roach raised his stick and smashed the silver skull handle through the window. Glass shattered and fell like sheets of water scattering across the shop floor. Mould pushed past his companion and reached a meaty paw in through the jagged hole to unbolt the door. "Quick!" Tadeus shouted. "Out the back way! I'll hold them off!" Robert pushed through the rag curtain, hustling Lily and Malkin down the passage ahead of him. They stopped short of the back door. A shadow lurked outside, visible through the glass. The third man. He rattled the handle. At the far end of the passage, Roach and Mould pushed past Tadeus and raced towards Lily and Malkin. "The workshop!" Robert yelled, but he barely had time to bundle the other two through the doorway and turn the key in the lock behind him before the two men barreled against the door. It shook as a barrage of fists and swear words were thrown against it. "They'll break the door down!" Robert screamed. And then he realised, "Tar's still on the other side." "Oh no, it's me they want. He'll be fine." Lily searched the workshop for an extra obstruction, and her eyes alighted on the old wardrobe with mirrored doors. "Help me move that." They wedged themselves into the gap between the cupboard and the wall and pushed the groaning thing into movement, inching it partway across the door. Lily moved round to the front of the cupboard. "Push it back hard." They heaved the cupboard against the door and its mirrored front juddered. Thud! "What are you doing in there?" Thud! "Removals." Thud! "Don't think that'll stop us, Miss Hartman, because it won't." The thudding turned into a heavy hammering. A riot of blows rained down on the door panels. The men were using a blunt instrument against it. Then lamplight flickered up through the crack on the still exposed side of the door, and Tadeus's voice rang out. "I warn you, sir, if you and your associates don't leave—" "Be quiet, you," Mr. Roach yelled. "Da!" Robert called, but Tadeus couldn't hear him. A loud explosion, sharp as a gunshot, ripped through the hall. There was a horrible ringing echo, like a high bell, and the thud of something hitting the floor. Then, in a flash, the light went out and smoke filtered round the edge of the door. Lily gave a strangled gasp, and Malkin let out a horrified yelp. Robert stared at the floor. A line of blood was trickling under the corner of the door. "Robert," his dar croaked, his voice a phlegmy gurgle. "Are you in there? For the love of heaven, son, get away." The door handle rattled. Mr. Roach spoke again. "No way out, I'm afraid, boy. Your father's had a rather nasty accident, but if you open the door, maybe we can help him." Robert gasped. "Boy, are you there?" Mr. Roach shouted. "Answer me. What have you done to him? Come out and see. I'll give you the count of 3. 1. Hot tears streamed down Robert's face. 2. How had things come to this? He should never have let his dar face those men alone. He desperately tried to move the wardrobe back, while Lily stumbled about behind him, frantically yanking open drawers in the workbench, searching for a weapon. 3. Lily grabbed a hacksaw and a screwdriver and tucked them into her belt. She tried to hand him something, but he brushed it aside. He felt dizzy, spinning with sickness. He never would have believed the men could take things this far. "Time's up," Mr. Roach said. "No more negotiations. If you won't come of your own accord, then we'll have to smoke you out." There was a fizzing hiss, and an orange glow flickered under the door. Fire! In less than a minute, it would start to lick round the edges of the cupboard. Then it would engulf the room. Malkin scurried in frantic circles, whining and yapping at them both. Jumping onto the workbench, he pointed up with his nose at the only way out. The skylight! Lily seized Malkin by the scruff and climbed onto the bench. Robert couldn't move. He stared at the dazed boy in the mirror. framed by the bubbling veneer of the cupboard. Behind him, Lily hammered on the skylight with her palms. Stiff with age, it refused to open. Out in the corridor, the crackle of flames exploded into an inferno, and beneath the noise he heard the men's bickering. "Out of control! Idiot! You let it run wild!" The back door banged. They left. With a roar of air and a blast of intense heat, the flames broke through the wood panelling and began licking across the room. Smoke swirled around Robert's feet. He glanced once more at the boy in the mirror. So far back, it seemed, he was in the corridor. He should have been there. It should have been him, not his Dar. "Help me with this, would you?" Lily hacked away at the skylight with her screwdriver. The paint was softening in the heat, and she hit the frame with her palm until it grumbled open, letting in a tiny chink of the night. She forced the screwdriver into the gap, pushing until it widened. Robert watched her shove her bundle and then a yelping Malkin through the opening. He thought she was going to climb up behind the fox, but she didn't. Instead, she put her face to the gap and sucked in a mouthful of fresh air. Then she jumped down and put a hand on his shoulder. "Robert, please." Her voice was strained and fierce. "I'm so sorry about your father, but you must come with us now." Robert's eyes smarted and his chest ached. His guts and lungs and head and heart were filled with burning fire and an intense, shocked sadness. "Why?" he asked. Lily wiped the smears of soot and tears from her face. "Because he told you to. He told you to get away." The smoke had risen above his nose. It drifted between them, fogging his view, confusing him. He fumbled with the buttons of his jacket and took one last look at the workshop as it melted around him. Lily stood waiting until he was ready. "I'm coming," he choked, the words spiky in his throat. She nodded, and they climbed onto the bench together. Now the smoke had reached the roof. It rolled along the blackening ceiling, engulfing everything in dense clouds. "Where's the skylight?" Lily's voice cracked with panic. Robert shook his head. He couldn't make it out in the choking haze. Then, from somewhere above, a little red snout appeared, snuffling at them. "Thank God! Out of the way, Malkin!" Lily pushed the skylight wide. "You first," she said, and shoved Robert out into the night. The roof tiles steamed and meltwater rushed along the lead-lined gully, streaming over their shoes. Malkin whined softly, and Lily gulped in great gasps of air. They were at the base of a slope with 8 feet of roof above them and a row of adjoining terraces on the other side of the summit. Robert leant forward and coughed up wads of black mucus. Watery flakes were settling on his head, dripping through his hair and running down his cheeks in rivulets. Dar was gone. He felt empty, a numb mess of skin and bone, as if his insides had been scooped out with a spoon. He grabbed a handful of mush and rubbed it roughly across his face. "We have to keep going," Lily said, picking up her bundle. With Malkin at her heels, she started to climb. When she reached the apex of the roof, she leaned against a chimney stack and glanced back at him. Robert wiped a sleeve across his face, brushing away snow and tears. He had no choice but to follow. He set off after her, numb fingers searching through the steam and cold for holds among the broken slates. His leather shoes slipped as he clawed his way forward. When he was within reach of the chimney, Lily clasped his hand and pulled him up. Wind and snow whistled round the stacks, knifing and cold in Robert's throat. Another wave of sickness washed over him. He caught his breath and stared down into the street at a fiery orange glow. Neighbours, wrapped in cloaks and coats, scurried from their houses with tin baths and buckets, shoveling snow and throwing it onto the fire. A knot of men, their clothes and hair steaming with black smoke, wrestled his Dar's body through the melted shop window. Robert slumped forward, tumbling into the slush. His fists met the tiles, and his mouth fell open. letting out a shrill cry that joined in the roar of the wind and fire. There was nothing he could do anymore. His life here was over. Robert's scream cut Lily to her bones. It was as if it were coming from somewhere inside her. She shuddered and slid down next to him, reached out a hand to take his, but he brushed her away. "Please," she whispered. "I know what it's like. That hurt. But we've got to go." "Why?" "Because," Malkin interrupted, "if we don't, those men will kill us." "This is your fault." Robert aimed a kick at him. "Get away from me, both of you." "I'm sorry," Lily said. "We should have helped. I didn't realise how far they'd go to try and get what they wanted." She glanced at Robert. His face was puffy with pain and his numb gaze had turned inwards. He had scraped at the tiles until his fingers bled, but was barely aware of it. Lily hugged her bundled box tight under her arm. "My family," she said. I'm involved in this, but you and your Da, Robert, he's innocent. He saved us, and if it weren't for him, we wouldn't be here." Robert let out a loud sob. "And if it weren't for you, he would be. This," he hissed, "is all because of you. Look after number one, that's what you're about." "No," she sputtered. "It's not true." But maybe it was. She had brought the box here, and Malkin had come. She'd decided it was safe to stay with them, despite all she now knew. That thought made her queasy. She tried to think of something else to say, something comforting, but the words dried in her throat. So instead, she took off his Da's coat and draped it over Robert's shoulders. "There," she said. She felt the cold now, in only her thin jacket, yet she knew Robert needed the coat much more than she did. Malkin shouldered his way between them and licked Robert's bleeding fingers with his rough pink tongue. A minute passed, and though Lily dearly wanted to let him sit, to comfort him, they couldn't afford to stop. Not now. There was still so much danger. "Robert," she said quietly. He glanced up and seemed to finally see her, for he wiped away an angry tear. "Should we go back?" he asked them. "I don't think so," Malkin said softly. "What would we be going back for?" And Lily knew in her heart of hearts he was right. They couldn't really, not as things stood. What had Mrs. Russ said? Life can be painful, and if you can't change what's happened today, bide your time until you're strong enough to fight tomorrow. Over the roof's edge, she glimpsed a row of searchlights in the lane. Mould and Roach's harsh voices echoed up to her. Malkin's black-tipped ears pricked up. He'd heard them too. "Time to move on," he said. "Yes," Lily nodded. She shifted her hold on the box and put an arm around Robert. Malkin tugged at his sleeve while she nudged him to his feet. As he leaned against her, she felt the ragged sobs on his breath. They slid down the far side of the rooftop, and in the next dip, Robert stumbled forward into a crawl. Lily and Malkin crawled beside him. Robert moved carelessly, barely taking in what he was doing. He was about to put his palm on a protruding nail when Malkin yapped him a warning. He shook his head and seemed to come around. They crossed 3 more summits this way before they found a place to descend, a yard piled high with packing cases, where a low outhouse, ending in an overhanging roof, met a high brick parapet covered with a thick layer of snow like icing. Her heart racing, Lily stepped forward and peered down. The white ground seemed to spill away beneath her in the dark. She lowered herself over the edge, and when she felt the tips of her toes graze the snowy parapet, she closed her eyes and let go. The wall met her body with a mushy thud. Malkin jumped down beside her as she steadied herself. "Now you," Lily shouted to Robert. He stared down at her. "I can't do it," he mumbled. "It's too high." "Come on," she said. "You've got to." She took his hand and he eased himself over the roof's edge, collapsing into her arms. When she looked down, Malkin was already in the yard, standing at the gate. his head cocked, listening. Lily held on to Robert, and they scrambled down a mountain of damp boxes to join him. "It's clear," the fox yipped as soon as they arrived. Cautiously, Lily opened the gate, and the three of them tumbled across the road and ducked into the hedgerow opposite. They brushed through the snowy branches and into the dark field beyond, and Lily let out a sigh of relief. They'd escaped, or three of them had, and at least for now, they were safe. Are they going to be safe for long? That's the question, isn't it? What a dramatic chapter we had there, and range of emotions in that chapter, and lots of sadness for what's happened to Tadeus, and thinking and thoughts for Robert as well, and how he's going to manage to keep going. We don't know, do we? But with Lily now and Malkin to support him and help him, hopefully the three of them now will form that bond and become invincible and manage to escape and from the two men that are following them, or the three men that are following them now. Anyway, you have got chapter 14 read by Mrs. Gaines tomorrow, so I hope you enjoy that one.